After I learned that the message cult was involved with countless human rights violations in Chile while working with Dinah and the Pinochet regime, and that Ewald Frank, who Sarah Branham visited for help, was directly involved, my concern for Sarah escalated very quickly. During the military dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet from 1973 to 1990, Colonia Dignidad served as a special torture center for the regime, and many of the message believers in Chile had assisted in the torture and the murder of anyone who posed a risk to Pinochet. Sarah Branham's letter described large sums of money flowing through the Branham Tabernacle, and after learning that message believers in Chile were manufacturing arms for internationally recognized arms dealers, I knew that her questioning the money placed her into immediate danger. I also noticed something even more concerning about the timeline. Sarah's letter to message believers around the world was written in July of 1989, while the Pinochet regime was still in power. According to Carlos Basso, Colonia Dignidad historian, Ewald Frank was a key figure in helping Colonia establish its weapons factories by contracting with Germans' arms dealers to assist message believers in Chile. Sarah Branham went directly to Frank seeking refuge, not knowing that she was putting the lives of herself and her family directly into harm's way. In 1991, 2 years after Sarah's letter, Chile's National Commission for Truth and Reconciliation began publishing the results of their investigation into the Pinochet regime and linked message believers in Chile directly to the experiments, torture, and murder of numerous people who had disappeared in Chile. Their findings was based on an October 1976 report from the United Nations entitled Disappeared Persons in Chile. Information about the activities of message leaders in Chile was soon to be big news, though I was certain that most message believers in the United States at that time had not been aware. Even with the many things that I heard my grandfather say about the unusual and sometimes criminal activities that members and leaders in William Branham's cult of personality were participating in, arms deals, human experimentation, torture, and mass murders in a cult compound were certainly never discussed. I began to wonder if other leaders in the message were aware of what happened in Colonia Dignidad. A friend of mine, who was also concerned for Sarah, remembered a sermon where Raymond Jackson, the leader of William Branham's sister church in Indiana, discussed Sarah's situation, and he said some very unusual things. This interested me because Jackson was one of the few leaders in the cult that tried to help Sarah rather than, quote, turn her over to the devil for the destruction of her flesh, or as non-cult, non-Christian people called it, threw her to the wolves in hopes she would die. To my surprise, the sermon was still available to the public, and it was released the exact same year that Chile's National Commission for Truth and Reconciliation began publishing their conclusion. I was very surprised when I listened to Jackson's sermon. When the risk of being connected to people involved with Colonia Dignidad reached back to the United States, Raymond Jackson had held a meeting in his church to sever all ties with all men connected to that situation. He even had a person sitting on the platform with him that held up the intent to sue documentation prepared by Sarah Branham's attorney, Gerald Lee Walker.
This is an attorney, a lawyer, by the name of Gerald Lee Walker. His office is in California. When he got a hold of this report, he's a Christian man, believes the same thing you and I do. He got to corresponding. So he got some information. He went to New York, and he talked with Sarah and her husband.
According to Jackson, he had investigated Sarah's situation and had a collection of details from several people involved, including others in the Branham family. This was written in a letter that I had a copy of, though at the time I was given the letter, I had no idea the darker secrets that were hidden beneath the words.
Hold it up before the people. Last year in our summer convention, you remember some things I said about Sarah Branham. That was just the beginning of a slow-growing process, of a situation between the children. And believe me, there's two sides to the coin. I know it. I've got letters in a file at home because in the following months after the convention, I had both opportunity to communicate with Billy Paul and Rebecca and Sarah and her husband. I've got various letters from different sources, more or less bringing out different details.
When I examined the letter from Raymond Jackson that was sent to Sarah Branham's brother, Billy Paul Branham, I noticed that it was dated June 25th, 1990, almost a full year after Sarah's original July 1989 letter addressed to the followers of the message. At the end of the letter, Jackson described his investigation into the situation in a very threatening way. He told Billy Paul that he had a filing cabinet full of the immoral things that leaders in William Branham's message cult of personality were doing, and that the information included research into Billy Paul's corporations in Tucson. Some of that information came directly from Gerald Lee Walker.
And I'm telling you, brothers and sisters, he's dug things out of the woodwork nobody knows that's been going on through the years. Now, the Branham movement, and I have to say it with respect, Billy Paul and his brother Joseph have allowed Satan to use them to take a position over a movement of people they should have run from. Sons don't fall heir to their father's ministry. Never have and never will. But if you allow it, the devil will take you for a spin. Number one, the deity. When Brother Branham was alive, he preached, crying against those men that wanted to make him Messiah. I was there. I watched him weep. It made me cry too, because he trembled. He felt so bad. He said, I would rather go out of this world as a quitter than to go out of this world as an Antichrist. Well, those men were supposedly have repented. But no sooner was he dead, that spirit rose right back upon those men. And they're all gathered right around the spoken word.
Jackson also attacked Joseph Branham for allowing members of the message to transition from the William Branham deity doctrines to that of a Joseph Branham cult of personality. There are also many people in the cult in Jeffersonville who believe that Joseph Branham is God, and globally, they believe that Joseph Branham has taken the mantle of William Branham and is therefore the new God in the flesh.
Right in that letter, as this lawyer came to this area a few months back to begin to do the investigation, he went to the Voice of God recording because it's no longer spoken word. They've changed it. And there he tried to get an interview, but was derailed. On the outside, then this lawyer and his father had a chance to talk to a man. His name was Simpson. I know him. He came out of Canada years ago. In the conversation, I can tell you what page it's on. This lawyer was told, well, Joseph is God. My Bible tells me, if any man be a fornicator, an idolater, that's what idolatry is. It's trying to deify and make a human being something that he really isn't.
Joseph and Billy Paul Branham, through Voice of God recordings and spoken word, print, sell, and distribute the sermons of William Branham to countries around the world in many, many different forms of media. They send missionaries around the globe, sometimes traveling with them, and teaching that, quote, everything William Branham says is thus saith the Lord.
Brother Joseph believes everything that Brother Branham says is thus saith the Lord.
Брат Иосиф верит, что все сказанное братом Бранхамом это так говорит Господь.
Amen.
Аминь.
I believe everything Branham says is thus saith the Lord.
Я верю, что
As a result, there are groups of Branhamites who worship Lord Branham or Christ Branham. Jackson used this fact as a means to publicly state his disagreement with the message, like waving a white flag to any who might be looking into his involvement with Colonia Dignidad.
No wonder then, hundreds, thousands of people throughout the world, from India to Africa to Mexico to the Scandinavian countries, wherever I've gone, there's a spoken word. But the Bible's out of the picture. This is the scripture for our day. It came by a prophet. I say yes. But he was not a writing prophet. He was a preaching prophet. Did you know, my friends, you don't read in here any of things that John the Baptist left us a book.
When Jackson turned on Ewald Frank, who Sarah Branham went to for help, I realized that Jackson was concerned about a government inquiry into the message. Ewald Frank was well respected among many message believers in the United States. Frank had helped William Branham establish his offices in Germany and helped spread the message into Africa, South America, and other parts of the world. Jackson opened up his file of dirt on Frank and aired it to the public during this speech. It was the first time that I was aware of where Jackson had ever said anything negative about Frank. Jackson held revivals with Frank during the 1980s, and he often bragged about Frank for sneaking in behind the Iron Curtain and infiltrating communist countries. Now that I was aware of exactly what Frank was doing, it was all the more concerning. It sounded as though Jackson himself also knew.
Then poor Dr. Ewald Frank, he had a pretty little secretary out of Canada, and he just felt like he needed another woman. And that brought a separation between him and his wife. Then he later, brothers and sisters, wrote a terrible letter concerning condemning his wife and blaming the whole thing on her. His wife didn't tell him to have an affair with his secretary.
I went back to Carlos Basso's book, La Secta Perfecta, and I examined the details that he gave about the message believers and their connections to world governments, criminal organizations, and an unbelievable amount of money. The cult, in collaboration with Dinah and the CIA, had 46,000 listening devices, and they were planting them in several unusual places. Many of them were installed to listen to the general public, and Dinah Intelligence was being trained from the message cult compound. I thought about how easy it would be to hide one of those listening devices in unexpected places, especially from a religious community where members dressed in Pentecostal holiness wardrobes. Nobody would suspect. As a reward, the Chilean government, under Augusto Pinochet, turned a blind eye to the massive amounts of money that was flowing through Colonia Dignidad. Even still today, there are millions of dollars that are unaccounted for. This appeared to be what Jackson was hinting at when he described the money and the power that was held by William Branham's children.
Now they have collaborated. They have fostered this. For what reason? To stay in position of power and monetary influence. Therefore, Satan uses the environment. And if you keep company with him, He'll use you too. Sooner or later, he'll either get in your pockets, in your mouth, in your brain. He'll use some part of you because you're going to collaborate and play along with his little game.
Jackson even went so far as to attack the recorded sermons and transcripts of William Branham himself. Jackson admitted that William Branham spoke from both sides of his mouth, or as many of the old-timers called it, William Branham spoke with a forked tongue. Jackson called this, quote, dual statements. He made a clear separation from William Branham's cult of personality, admitting that William Branham had tailored his sermons to the crowds.
So I'll tell you, brothers and sisters, in the message of Brother Branham was dual statements. Many people, they just take the one. Most of them take the wrong one, though. They took the right one and put them in the Bible. They take the wrong one, they're out of the Bible.
All of this was very concerning. I went back to examining the timeline. It seemed odd that Jackson made these clear statements of separation this long after Sarah Branham's original letter and his response. If Raymond Jackson did the research before June of 1990, and it was enough to fight for Sarah Branham's health and welfare at that time, why did he suddenly pull away after the authorities had connected message believers to international crimes? Jackson hinted at what was happening by saying that it was mind-boggling and worrisome. It was at this point that I knew that message leaders in the United States were aware of everything that was going on in the cult. From the information that Gerald Lee Walker published, to William Branham's involvement with Ewald Frank, to Colonia Dignidad and the Pinochet regime, and more. It was extremely disheartening. My own grandfather had received a copy of this information, as did other men that I knew and respected. Not just for Jackson, all of them knew. Jackson, who feared the worst, jumped ship.
But the condition kept grinding on. Actually, it got so confusing, I just actually wanted to get completely away from the picture of it all, because it was actually mind-boggling and worrisome.